the interviewer for you today, and we're at the Taneytown Museum. And I'd just like to start in terms of recording your oral history and your memories by asking you to just tell me your full name.
Okay.
And your date of birth, which I'm not sure you want to do. But
James H. Fair, lifelong member, resident of Taneytown, in fact, for some generations. Mm-hmm. And I'm under 90, okay?
Okay, so why don't we start today by you taking me back to, I know that much of your family history is actually involved in Taneytown. So maybe we can start back and you can tell me how they even, do you know if they came from Europe, or you don't know the history of
really know.
When, do you know when they first came to Taneytown?
I've never researched it. My grandfather never talked much about family, which is kind of strange, but
right.
Never researched it, but there are land records showing that Fairs lived on Frederick Street in Taneytown centuries ago.
Centuries ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with some of your memories of your early days and your father and your grandfather.
I was born on George Street, they tell me. Early childhood on York Street. My parents rented from Jimmy Bumgardner, who owned Jimmy Bumgardner's Hotel. We lived across the hall from Jimmy and Elizabeth. Then, early 30s, I might mention that the story that my parents would tell about when we lived on York Street, that they caught me eating ground in the garden, and it scared them to death. They took me to Doc Elliott, and Doc Elliott says, "Oh, there's probably something his body needed. It's not going to hurt him." So that's the way the doctors worked back then. So then my dad decided he wanted to build a house and came to Mr. Cleve Ligor on East Baltimore Street, known as then as East End, who had built on half of a lot here on Baltimore Street. He said, "Cleve, would you sell me the other half of this lot? I want to build a little house." And so they did. He went to Ed Stuller, who was the builder at the time, and the company, in fact, just dissolved a few years ago, Stuller Construction. And so Ed came back with plans for this 6-room house with no attic, just a dormer, and $3,200. And my dad said, "Oh my heavens, we can't afford that. You've got to make some changes. You've got to take that pantry off the back." And so he came back, $2,900 to build the house in the early 30s. So we moved there. I began school from there, walked to school every day, walked down the street up by Nussbaum's Cannon Factory, across the schoolyard, and in the back door. And did that for all the years that we was in school.
So it was a full, it went from elementary to high school.
Through high school at that time. There was a portable on the back. The school was only built in 1925 or 6, I believe, because my dad graduated in 25, and it was the only graduating class that graduated from the Opera House because they didn't have a school. And the school wasn't finished then yet. And by the time I started school, or soon after at least, they had to put a portable out back, and the 3rd and 4th grades were in a portable back of the school. My dad drove a bread route, had three routes, did one on Monday and Monday, Thursday, and then the other route on Tuesday and Friday, and then the other one on Wednesday and Saturday. Retail, delivered to the farms and people and the whole area. Was self-employed, bought the bread from Smith's Model Steam Bakery, which is kitty corner across from the Lutheran Church on West Baltimore Street. Used to load the truck in the afternoon. You would get the fresh bread out of the oven. It would go through the slicer and wrapper, wax paper wrappers. And so he never took any time off. I mean, the only way he could have a day off was if he drove 2 routes on one day. Leave early in the morning, and on the Monday, Wednesday route was the shortest one. We'd get home afternoon. So I started riding with him on that truck and helping carry a few loaves of bread into houses many times. The first multiplication table that I ever learned was my 9 table, because most bread that we sold was 9 cents a loaf. Model Steam Bakery, owned by the Smiths, Webb Smith, Bob Smith, was a familiar name around here. And then war came, gas rationing, families started, the women started working, the family dynamics changed entirely, and so he had to give up the bread route. And went across the street to Norman Bumgardner, who ran the Grain and Supply Company, Taneytown Grain and Supply, and asked for a job because he had helped his uncle on the farm and father-in-law on the farm some, and so he knew something about farming, so he went to work there. Sort of built their lumber business, if I remember. He kind of designed the big circular saw that they used to use to cut different lengths of lumber and to lay out the boards, and he had them marked for different lengths and that sort of thing. Then got interested in chickens and selling chicken feed, and would call on many farmers and sell chicken feed. So he worked at Taneytown Grain Supply Company, eventually became a vice president, I guess, there.
How long did he work there? Do you remember?
He worked there until he had developed glaucoma, and it was before they knew what glaucoma was. It wasn't diagnosed as glaucoma until he lost his sight. One eye entirely, the other very much impaired. So he couldn't drive anymore, and so on. And they bought a place in the country, and he raised chickens and turkeys and so on. And for a time.
Did your mom work?
She started working when I started school, and went up the alley to the Bornstein's sewing factory, which was Taneytown Manufacturing Company, on what's now, we called it up the alley, but it was now Broad Street. And got a job there. I remember some of the girls that she worked with would come home with her at lunchtime, bring their lunch along and eat in our kitchen because it was so hot up at the sewing factory there with the pressers and so on. So she worked there for many years, maybe till they closed. Then she was a clerk at the 5 and 10 store, Mr. Polly's 5 and Dime uptown. I remember as a kid, the kids, the Smiths, that David Smith ran the economy store uptown. They lived next to us, 4 children. Down the street was the Kuntzes, and we would play out, under the street lights at night, hide and seek in the front yards along the street. Red light, if you ever heard of red light. Fond memories of the kids all playing outside. And when I got old enough to ride a bike, why, we would ride bikes around town and so on. Parents never worried about you. In fact, if you got into any kind of mischief, before you got home, your mother knew it, because one of the other mothers would be calling, right? Everybody just knew everybody else. Married young, right out of high school, and I know we rented an apartment back of what was the American store then, became the library for a while in Taneytown, but there was a row of apartments back there. And went around to Charlie Schreiner and asked about, because he owned a number of rental units around town, and asked him if he had a place to rent. And well, that was one that he had available, and it was $15 a month. I remember the rent. We had 3 children. Our oldest daughter lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. She has 3 boys. Our son lives in Toronto, Canada. He has 2 boys. And we have a daughter here close in Taneytown who's an RN. But I think they have good memories of Taneytown too. It was a community where everybody knew everybody, After the Smiths moved out next to us, Harry Doherty and Bessie and their little son, Harry Jr., moved next door. And as the war started, he had trouble getting help in the store. And the grocery was in a part of Jimmy Bumgardner's hotel on the York Street side. And so I was probably 14, went over and asked him if he needed some help, if I could have a job there, after school, part-time, and so on. And so that's where I started working at Doherty's Grocery. And they would open 7:30 in the morning, and you stayed open until people quit coming in. And many times I remember they were out in the garden working before they went to the store. So, hard-working people, very good to me. And Doherty's Grocery became a part of my life at that time. And then, where do we go from here?
Well, I know you told me a story about how you got the car that you needed when you were working.
That's true. Well, maybe we ought to back up to and mention about my grandparents. Mm-hmm. They lived at the top of George Street, only 3 houses from the school. So when I started school, I would always go down to Grandma's for lunch. And I remember any cold, rainy day, I would look forward to her potato soup, which I loved. She'd always have potato soup on a cold, rainy day, right? But my grandfather worked at the Carroll Record, and he would walk home from down there. That was close to the railroad. Well, in the Opera House was the Carroll Record Company. Printer.
So, for people that don't know, can you tell a little bit about the Carroll Record?
Yes, that was a weekly newspaper and printing company. I mean, they printed, well, at that time, you know, like for the church, they would print all their bulletins and everything for the church. It was before the days of copiers. But my granddad, my great-grandfather was the builder of many of the large homes in Taneytown, and in 1898 was the builder for the Lutheran church renovations. The congregation voted to only spend up to $8,000 for the renovations after they had turned down another proposal and so on. And after it was all finished and dedicated, the cost was something like $17,000. I know it was a little over double what they'd approved. So even back then, there were cost overruns, right? But my grandfather was the hod carrier for his dad, carrying bricks and mortar on his back up the ramps to build the bell tower. And after that job was finished, he said, I don't want to do this all my life. He was probably only 16, 17 years old. And so he goes down to the street to, I think, a cousin maybe, P.B. Engler, who ran the Carroll Record. And he got a job as a typesetter, a compositor at the Carroll Record. And after they invented the linotype, they bought a linotype, and he would have to go in, like he would go to work at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning to get the fire, build the fire to melt the lead for the linotype. But I used to enjoy sitting on the bench with him as he typed with his two fingers, just as fast as ever. On this type would come rattling down, and then he'd correct any mistakes and so on, and then pull the lever down, and it would be a line of type. And they would put that together on the big board.
So how did they get the stories when they did the weekly? Was it of the town, or was it
Town and county.
town news?
Town and county. Mm-hmm.
Did they have like what we would know now as reporters, or was it one person kind of doing everything?
Mr. Engler, the editor, did a lot of that. They always had a column of personals on the front page, you know, so-and-so visited with so-and-so on Tuesday afternoon, and so-and-so played cards at so-and-so's house. That was the personals. And my grandmother and granddad and, you know, the family would try and collect those kind of things. There were also a couple of women that had interest in the Carroll Record. Oh boy, name's not going to come to me now. But anyway, they helped there too. And I guess they got a little pay, I'm not sure.
Well, did they have advertising?
Yes, and there was ads in the paper,
local
of course.
businesses.
Yep, yep. So then, you mentioned, well, after we moved, after I was at Doherty's, after I got married, for a while we were without a car. I used my parents' car when we had to. So I had an offer to sell life insurance with Lutheran Brotherhood, which was a fraternal society, could only sell Lutherans. And so the fellow came and talked to me about that, and I sure wasn't interested in selling insurance, but as things worked out, I finally gave it a try, and the Dohertys were, agreeable. In fact, he even gave me some time off, like on a Saturday, I couldn't get an appointment in the evening with somebody, and I'd say, Harry, could I maybe go see these people on a Saturday afternoon? It's kind of slow between 2 and 3 or something, and he would let me do that. So Merle Oler was the Chevrolet dealer, had his garage down the street from us, which is sort of across from the New Windsor Bank branch now. He lived 2 doors away. Again, neighbors, right? So I said, Merle, I need to buy a car. You don't need a car. You can use your dad's car. I said, no, I'm starting in business. I need a car. But I don't have hardly any money. So he said, no problem. I'll loan you the money. You pay me 0.5% interest per month on the declining balance. Just give me any amount that you can on the principal anytime you can, and we'll get you a car. Shook hands, and that was it. Don't think you would do that today. So, had a lot of help from a lot of people over the years. But that's the way the small town was. I took the census in 1950 and 1960. And don't remember the figures exactly, but I think the population in 1950 was like 1,650. And 10 years later, it was like 1,654. But that was within the city limits, and there was some building out east end here beyond the city limits. I'm not sure where they ended out the street here, but that was the town. The school, of course, had all the grades up on George Street from 1st through 12th. And our youngest daughter was in the last graduating class, which was 1968. They built Francis Scott Key, which was supposed to include Taneytown, Union Bridge, and New Windsor schools. Taneytown really fought this merger and won for a little while. So the kids from New Windsor and Union Bridge went to Key, and the agricultural students went to Key. They bussed them over because they didn't have an ag program after that here in Taneytown. So 1968, the school closed. The Board of Education used it for storage. They left it deteriorate. The roof got bad on the old part. Rain came in, ruined a lot of the school. Even though the town was offered it, they felt they couldn't use the whole school and so on. So it was finally agreed, 99% sure I'm right here, that the town would use the auditorium and 4 classrooms, which were added later, which were the newer part of the school on the back, and that they would tear down the front part, the part that was built in the 1920s. So the firemen decided this would be a good training exercise for the firemen to go into the school, set a fire in a room, put it out, and so on. So all of the fire companies in Carroll County came and met at the activities building at the west end of town to get instructions and tell them how they were going to do this and that sort of thing. One of the companies decided they didn't need that training, so they went up to the school right away in the morning on a Sunday morning, and they set fire in one of the rooms. But before they could put it out, it spread to the ceiling, up above the ceiling. It got into the roof area and spread. And I know when we came out of Sunday school, that was probably 10 o'clock. I remember seeing this black pillar of smoke. And of course, all the fire sirens all around. All of the Carroll County firemen were in Taneytown already, right? But it got away from them. They even called in Littlestown, Gettysburg that had a fire truck with a tower on it, you know, whatever and of course it burnt the whole thing. So they lost the auditorium and the 4 rooms that the city was going to take over and everything. Oh, so the whole school was destroyed that morning in error.
What a crazy mistake.
Yeah, and it was just people all
How
around taking
embarrassing.
pictures, right? But I remember that end of George Street, the water just running, you know, this deep from all the water that was being pumped into that building. But it took it all, that's for sure.
I bet somebody's head rolled on that one.
You
Oh
would
my
think
gosh.
so.
Yeah, you
I
would
don't
hope so.
remember that there
Would hope
was.
so.
I don't remember that there was, but yeah, that was a shame.
So it seems that you keep going back to kind of the way Taneytown has grown as a small town and sort of interdependent on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
seems to be the theme.
I
What
think so.
about in terms of the change? Is there anything that you feel is really positive in terms of the way things have changed over time? Like, what are the benefits? No.
There certainly has to be, but it's a different world. It's a different world we live in, you know? And I'm too old, I guess, to appreciate maybe that. It just seems like the good old times were good. But maybe we tend to forget the bad parts of those, you know, the problems that we had and so on. I think Taneytown's been very fortunate in their electric supply. You know, we very, very seldom lose electricity in the town. A lot of places, you know, when they have storms, people will be out for hours and hours, and there's apparently a circular supply that when one side gets hit, the other supply, you know, we just are fortunate in that respect, I think.
I know that you were talking a little bit about when you were young and playing in the street and doing the kind of games that people did a lot before there was television in the house
Right.
to watch. But what about now in terms of sort of recreation? Is there anything, because I have heard someone mention
Well, my wife and I like to ballroom dance. In high school, we were seniors, I suppose. The principal brought in a young woman who had been one of the Rockettes.
Wow.
A beautiful gal. So that brought the guys to dance lessons, right? So we learned some dance in high school in the auditorium. Girls would sit on one side, the boys on the other, right? And then you had to go ask the girl to dance. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? And some of the guys hated it. But met my wife in senior year in high school. She transferred, her family moved, and she transferred from Elmer Wolf and Union Bridge to Taneytown. And so we started dancing, and after we were married, we went dancing whenever we could. And I remember going to Hershey Park on Saturday nights. My parents would keep the kids. We would go to Hershey, dance to Glenn Miller and Guy Lombardo and all the big bands. We liked big band dancing. And our Lions Club, our Alumni Association, the High School Alumni Association, which I might talk a bit about too, would have an annual dance at Sunnybrook Farm or the high school auditorium earlier than that. And so it was a lot of dancing to live bands. And when I retired in 2000, it happened in the paper. The senior center was offering ballroom dance lessons. It was a fellow from Les Stabilius is his name, from Hampstead area, who came to the senior center here to teach ballroom dancing. And my wife says, you're retired now, we got to do something here. We're going to go. And I fought it, but finally went. And after a few weeks, I said, Les, this is nice, but we've been dancing all our lives, and I've been doing it wrong. And to try and change now, it's not working. And he said, you look good, musicality's all right, you can learn some new moves, some new steps, and so on. Hang in there. And so it only lasted here 1 year. Wasn't enough interest. So he went to the senior center in North Carroll, closest home, and continued with lessons over there. We started going to North Carroll every Friday. And when they moved into their new facility over there, which has a beautiful big ballroom, you might say, with mirrors on the end, and so on. And so we've been going there ever since. We love to go to Penmar on Sundays in the summer, to the live bands up there and dancing. And belong to the Woodsboro Dance Club and Thurmont Dance Clubs. And so we've done a lot of.
That keeps you young.
I think it keeps us mobile
That's
anyway.
right. It keeps you young, keeps you moving.
But,
you want to talk a little bit about your membership with the Lions?
Yes, and before that, they had a great JC organization, Junior Chamber of Commerce. Before it was called JC's, it was Junior Chamber of Commerce in Taneytown, which I joined, and which a lot of young businessmen in Taneytown belonged to, and that was terrific training. I mean, Robert's Rules of Order and protocol and that sort of thing. I mean, it was a great training organization. No longer in existence around here. I don't think they have one even in Westminster anymore. It's a shame, because it was only to age 35. You had to, it was only for up to age 35. But I stayed in the Lions Club had started while I worked for Harry Doherty. He was one of the charter members and was later a district governor. And so I found out after I became secretary of our Lions Club that here I was approved for membership way back soon after they started, but I never joined. I was in JC's. And so after I became an exhausted rooster in the junior chamber for a few years, then finally was talked into joining the Lions Club, and have been a member there for 38 years maybe, or somewhere around there, I think. And when Henry Reindaler, who was at Reindaler Hardware, he was the secretary of the Lions Club. And when he died, and they needed a secretary, so I took over as secretary, and I just this month ended that career. And somebody said, "How long were you secretary?" And I said, "Oh, it must be 15 years." And I looked it up. It was 19 and a half years that I was secretary of the local club.
You must have been good.
Well, I don't know about that. They put up with it anyway.
They're a very active club in Taneytown, I know.
Yes.
So,
We have 60 members, something like that.
excellent.
It's been a good service organization and been good for the town, and the town's been good to them.
And I think what I see in Taneytown is that there are still a lot of active citizens in terms of service clubs and volunteers that you don't see in every town. So you're very lucky. It kind of continues.
Yeah,
You know.
it's a shame the Kiwanis and Lions were both
Right.
very active clubs at one time,
Yeah.
and Kiwanis has left town because their numbers diminished. Our membership has been improved, held up, largely due to Carroll Vista. We have members there. And some years ago, they began accepting women as members. You know, at a time it was the good old boys club, but we now have a number of women in.
That makes everything better, doesn't it?
Oh, I think so. Sure. I'll agree with you. Yes.
Jim,
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for sharing with us today.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.